That was scary. Hello. Welcome, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started in just a couple moments. Let people join us. Thank you all for joining us. We'll let a couple more people join us and we'll let Morgan get back on. Good to see you, Morgan.
My internet is out like clockwork, so I'm on my mobile hotspot.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. It is a beautiful day outside in New York, so a special thanks to those of you who stepped inside for this evening. I am very excited for our evening together. This was an idea. The idea for this adult education panel came from Jama Tung, who actually just chatted to us in the chat. So thank you so much for thinking of this, Jama. 3 of our mission partners at Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church are led by individuals who identify as LGBTQ. And these organizations also offer programming that value inclusion of LGBTQ individuals within Christian contexts. This evening, we have with us Bryan Breault, who is representing Holmes Presbyterian Camp and Retreat Center this evening, but is actually going to be moving on to something new soon. So thank you within the midst of this transition for joining us tonight, Bryan. We also have Marian Edmonds-Allen, who is with Parity, and Edafe Okporo, who is with RDJ Refugee Shelter, who is also in the midst of transition. So thank you so much for joining us. And finally, you will notice that we have our Director of Engagement, Morgan Valencia King, with us this evening. And we have asked Morgan to moderate this conversation. So I am very excited to hear from all of you. So thank you, Morgan, for being willing to do this.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I have absolutely no experience moderating panels, so I just can't even imagine why Jamie would have asked me, of all people. No, I am really glad to be here tonight, though. The topic for tonight, of course, has to do with representation in faith-based leadership. I'm particularly glad to be part of this discussion because, as many of you know, I grew up in an evangelical Southern Baptist church. And so it was really difficult to find any representation of queer leadership outside of cautionary tales and flat out condemnation. And since joining the PCUSA with its welcoming and inclusive nature, I personally still don't have a ton of LGBTQ examples of leadership in the church. At this point, it's only been about 10 years since the General Assembly voted to remove the prohibition of gay and lesbian ordination, both for teaching and ruling elders, leaving the ultimate decision of whether or not LGBTQ persons are acceptable up to the presbytery. So now, 10 years removed from that, here we are with 3 absolutely fantastic leaders who are killing it, as young people say, who happen to represent 3 of Fifth Avenue's mission partners. To get us started, I'm just gonna let everybody introduce themselves. So just take a moment, tell us a little bit about who you are, tell us about your organization and your journey to get there. So ladies first, because I'm Southern, let's start with Marion.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm so happy to be here with my FAPC friends. My name is Marian Edmonds-Allen, and I'm the Executive Director of Parity. Parity works at the intersection of faith and LGBTQ, which is, as we all know, a huge thing. So when people ask me, well, what does that mean? That means that I talk to faith people about LGBT folks, and I talk about faith with LGBT organizations and LGBT people. So for example, this week I was part of a panel for a congressman. It was a pride panel with different really fierce LGBT advocates. And as kind of an afterthought, they emailed me and said, well, we think we should include faith. And I said, what a great idea. So I was there advocating for faith. But in other settings, I'll be the clergy person who will out myself and scare everyone and then advocate for LGBT folks. So that's what I do.
Thank you so much. We're so glad to have you. Brian?
My name is Bryan Breault. I'm actually ordained in the United Church of Christ, but because we are in full communion, I was invited to come be the executive director of Holmes Camp and Retreat Center. When I got here, we were Holmes Presbyterian Camp and Conference Center, but I pretty quickly realized that what we did was better, was retreats than conferences. There's a subtle difference there. This board and this place were poised to do all sorts of things. They just didn't know quite how to be as welcoming as they wanted to be. So in addition to putting together Camp Q, which we may now have to change the name since Q has gotten a bad name since then, but Camp Q originally, we were going to be, I was going to call it Queer Camp. And the people in my generation in particular just were not ready for that. I think people that we were actually, the audience we were looking at would have been fine with that term, and maybe in the future. But this is part of the changing of how mores and social values change, taking a word that was used for one generation in a derogatory way and using it as a term of empowerment. So it was a step in the right direction there. And Marion helped me with that particular week, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little later tonight. But more than that, trying to be welcoming in subtle ways. I used to stand up myself and say, ladies and gentlemen, before we would do anything at camp. And now I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, both and neither, just as a way to let people know that everybody's welcome. And also start looking at, sleeping in the, how sleeping arrangements are made at camp, bathroom assignments, things like that. So, there's all sorts of little ways that we can be welcoming without just saying, you are affirmed, which is also important, but we're looking for those other ways too.
That's wonderful. Thanks. Edafe.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Edafe. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the current executive director of RDJ Refugee Shelter in Harlem. When I came to America, I discovered that there was a need for housing for LGBTQ people who are displaced, especially in New York City. Back in 2017, if you didn't have any form of identification, you couldn't get into like city shelter or any other form of housing. So RDJ Refugee Shelter was born out of the need to provide a safe space for LGBTQ people. And there's this kind of like accumulation of like a place of faith that has been threatening for people fleeing persecution from different parts of the world, coming to America and coming to stay in a church. So something that made it easier is that St. Mary Episcopal Church in Harlem is part of the Episcopal Diocese of New York, but our rector, Reverend Mary, she's a lesbian, and she makes it more welcoming for people of different strides to be there. I remember a transgender client who came from Honduras. She's Catholic, and while she was staying there, she said that she lost touch with faith because like religion was used to persecute her in her home country, and coming to America and staying in a church is like, this is what faith should be, a place of refuge for people who are displaced. So that is the work I've been doing for the last 4 years, is providing access to housing for LGBTQ people in New York City, working with houses of worship, not just Episcopal Charity, but other sanctuary coalition to provide a safe space for LGBTQ refugees and displaced people in New York City.
Wow. Thank you so much. We're so glad that all three of you could join us. I'm really excited to hear from you. Our first two questions, we're going to just kind of focus on each one of you individually. And then after that, we'll open it up for more panel discussion. So having heard a little bit more about each of your journeys, can you just say a little bit about what for you it means to be a person of faith? So I think we'll start with Marion and then just keep the same order.
Sure. I've been a person of faith my entire life. I grew up wanting to go to church. My family weren't churchgoers, so I would beg my parents to drive me to town so I could go to church. And I ended up going to lots of different churches to try them out and to see what it was like, because I was just on this quest for God. And it's lasted my whole life. I ended up going to an evangelical college, Gordon College. I joined the Reformed Church, became a deacon and an elder, and that was my faith journey. And it wasn't until I was in CPE, clinical pastoral education, at Maine Medical Center at the age of 40 that I met my first queer person. And that totally rocked my world, because one, it scared me. I'd never met a gay person. And the other thing that scared me was a few weeks later realizing that was me. So then I really wrestled with what that meant for me personally. And here I am today, because what I say about it is God just wouldn't let go of me. And my faith today is stronger because I realized that I'm a queer person. I'm a better queer person because of my faith. And I'm a better clergy person because I'm queer. I believe that queer people uniquely reflect the beautiful diversity of God. And for me, I see God's beauty in all the queer people I know. And my life is just so much richer, and my faith is too. And my connection to God has only become stronger. So this journey of faith is just better because I learned I was queer.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Brian, what about you? What does it mean to be a person of faith?
It means everything. And I love listening to Marion and talking about how God wouldn't let her go, and making that distinction between the search for your own spiritual center, for God, and the human institution that we call our different religious organizations, the church in our case. And, you know, it's been a fascinating time to be a person of faith in the church, because on the one hand, the church itself, and by the church, I mean the sort of Protestant mainline church that most of us are associated with, has been in decline for lots of reasons. We all know that. That's not news. I'm not convinced that it's an endless drop, but we've watched that happen. And at the same time, the church has become more inclusive. I think for me, when I was a younger person, very much a church, involved in church in every way, I loved it. It was a social, it helped salvation for me. It helped me be who I wanted to be without ever talking about it, because in the 70s, it wasn't, in the suburbs, at least of Connecticut, it wasn't that being gay was such a terrible thing. It just didn't exist. And so I really felt like I was the only person in the whole world who was ever gay, because I remember talking to my pastor about, gee, could we have a youth session on homosexuality? And he said, sure, and sent out permission slips from all there was a big thing in the church, and then we had a night talking about sexuality, and the word homosexuality never came up. So the lesson was very clear. We just don't talk about that. So then I went to college, went away, prodigal son story, came back to the church, went to divinity school, became a part of the movement, if you will, at the time. And it's not like I think, oh, here I am, ministering to queer people. Here I am ministering with people. And yes, a lot of us are queer. And the more we can celebrate that and who we are, the more everybody is celebrated and who they are. You know what I mean? You both want to hold people up, but also say we're very much the same. So that's my work. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Edafe, what does it mean for you to be a person of faith?
Thank you very much for that question. I love hearing from both of them, because I feel like we are in a different generation. Like, we grew up in a different generation. I feel in America, it's safer for me to be a person of faith and also be queer, but it wasn't all that safe for me in my own country, Nigeria. I remember I wanted to be a priest, because if I'm a priest, people would not ask me, when are you getting married? It was a safe place for me to hide who I was from the general public. And this is something that happened that really changed my perception about religion and faith and this journey I have been on for the past few years. When I was like 22 or so, I tried to meet like somebody on the gay dating app. And this person was like, oh, I'm not going to send you my face or nothing. I was like, okay, let's still meet. And when I got to the place, it put me in a car, drove me into the house. When I got to the house, I discovered that it was the vestry building of a very big, gigantic Anglican church. And I was like, oh, it's a priest. I didn't know that he was a priest. And I didn't do anything with him, but I was like, I don't want to live a life like this whereby I have to hide who I am for people to love and accept me. And I think that was when I came out as a gay person. And I left the church for some time. I was an ordained minister. I left the church for some time. Coming back to the church and as embracing my faith in America was a radical act of acceptance because I wasn't accepted in the communities I felt I would be accepted in. Like, because I'm a gay person in the African community, people don't see me as an African, quote unquote, they see me as a gay person. So the church that I found myself in was the only safe community I felt like I was embraced in. And a church boy is always a church boy. So I felt like light cannot shine in light. Light has to shine in darkness. And that is something I feel I carry. I carry the light of God. So I have to go to places where there are darkness and be myself radically. I'm not there to convince people to love me, but I'm just there to be myself because I know what it was when I wasn't myself. So being a person of faith is a radical acceptance of who you are, no matter where you find yourself in. And it gets better with time because like Marian is my friend. There's so many people of faith that are my friends now because when you step into that light, you begin to meet other people that are already in that light, and light up light, and you move together. It's powerful, it's stronger, and you could create sustainable change. So I feel like faith has made me a better person. It has made me to embrace who I am and continue to push the boundaries of what it means to be a queer person.
Thank you. That's fantastic. So can you each just say a little bit more? You introduced your organization, but can you say a little bit more about what your institution is doing specifically to make a difference for the LGBTQ community? Marion, we'll start with you again, not only because you started each time, but because there might be the most kind of direct correlation with you.
Sure. So Parity was originally Presbyterian Welcome, and Parity is, 25 years old now. Presbyterian Welcome started to advocate for marriage equality and ordination. And after that was achieved in the Presbyterian Church, it was decided to change the name to Parity and to move beyond simply the Presbyterian Church to all of Christianity, and in the past couple of years have worked in multi-faith settings as well. But our focus is on queer people. And the way we talk about it is we want every single LGBT person to have access to God if they choose. Because who else in the world is told that God hates them, they're not welcome in a church? It's just LGBT folks. So that is the thing that we push up against. And we do that in several ways. We do that with retreats for seminarians and new pastors. We work with young people to help them have access to faith. We are working with folks in really conserving settings. We're working with the faith leaders so that they realize that there are LGBT folks within their congregations. And then we're working with those LGBT folks to find each other and to be supported in their faith journeys. So we're starting Bible studies all over the world. I just had a message today from Nairobi where there's a new group that started, and these queer Christians are finding each other and caring for each other. They're not only their faith journeys, but also their personal needs, their medical needs. We also work with seniors, pastoral care settings, hospice. Gosh, we need more volunteers now that I list all these things. But as you can see, LGBT folks, you know, it's a life range of needs and how it changed. There's family acceptance. We're very involved in that. Also in direct services with homeless youth and in suicide prevention. And another thing that's very important for queer people is, and it seems so counterintuitive, but it's religious freedom, actually. So we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to try to influence conservative folks to be more accepting of LGBT people. Often I show up in my clerics and smile at everyone and try to be friendly and say, you know, my faith is so important to me. Religious liberty is so important to me. And you can just see their faces change because they've never realized that someone could be LGBT and be a person of faith. So it's a whole lot of stuff that we do that is really joyous. You know, there are hard things, hard stories, but the stories of queer people finding their faith, finding each other, finding God, realizing that God loves them. Oh my goodness, it's beautiful work. And I am grateful to Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church for supporting our work. You are a major sponsor of this important work that we do.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a follow-up. I guess I can. You
have
said
the
something.
power.
Jamie's gone, I guess, our camera's off. So you said that LGBTQ people are the only ones that are unilaterally told consistently that they're not welcome in church. And when you said that, I'd never thought about that. And it's kind of, oh yes, that's true. Do you want to just say a quick word about why you think that is? You know, because I think a lot of communities, sweeping generalization, have texts of terror, I think, in scripture. So what is it about us?
I think it is how people interpret scripture. So much of it comes back to that. And then scripture is the basis of theological positions and doctrine. So it becomes really tricky because, you know, you can't tell someone, oh, your theology is wrong, your doctrine is wrong. So that isn't what we do. What we do is we say, you have LGBT folks in your pews, you have families, you have parents who have LGBT people. And so many pastors actually have family members that are LGBT, so they know this. So what we advocate for is, okay, if that's in your theology, do not preach it from the pulpit, because we can show how suicide attempts spike and how kids get kicked out of homes because of that. So that's really the point we're pushing at, is not to preach that God doesn't love someone or that someone isn't welcome in church. God loves everyone. Everyone should be welcome in church.
Thank you for that. Brian?
Well, Marion is much nicer and less arrogant than me. I actually do tell people their theology is wrong. And by that, what I mean is not the nuances, but as long as a theology is, yes, it can be scripturally based, but it also, if it is telling me or anybody else that they do not have a right to exist, and that can go for systemic racism, all sorts of different ways that can play out in different churches, then no, that's not an okay theology. You know, your right to a separate opinion stops when it begins to infringe on my rights. And so, you know, I put that out there for the discussion. But as far as Holmes Camp goes, we also are very grateful for Fifth Avenue being a partner in a very active and deliberate way. And it would that we had so many churches that would take the camping opportunity that is Holmes so seriously and tend it as well as Fifth Avenue has. So thank you to everybody involved there. You know, the sort of subtle ways that I mentioned, I would like to think of a time when kids come to camp, children come to camp, and they go all the way through and just think that being accepted for who you are is the most normal thing. One of our biggest impediments right now is sort of Marion was alluding to, if I put on a collar, or if I present myself as a pastor, there are people that young people that look the other way and say, why would I want to be a part of any organization that just absolutely is against who I am as a person? And so there's our opportunity, right? That's where we can say, aha, no, actually, we absolutely believe that you have had that experience. A lot of us have had that experience too, but we want to let you know that we're rewriting history, and we're saying, going forward, and we're saying very clearly that, we can talk about those 7 texts in the Bible. There's all sorts of ways that we can stand up against what I would consider theology that is not inclusive. So I think Holmes is doing that, both in terms of the direct things like Camp Q and in the small ways as well. I know that moving forward, the board is really very active right now about trying to have, we've thought of ourselves up till now as sort of a summer camp, and we have this other, off-season stuff that we do, and we rent out our site to other sites. And by the way, a lot of the groups that we rent our sites out to are LGBT directly, or certainly LGBT friendly. So, as we move forward, we're thinking of ourselves more as a retreat center who also have a great summer camp, and all the things that we could do, like with seminaries and doing LGBTQ work and working on systemic racism and things like that. So that is exciting, actually. And I think that work that is catching on, has caught on, and will continue. So that's my answer.
Thank you. All right, Edafe.
I think that I was just looking at our data as they were speaking, and just to quantify the amount of LGBTQ people we have helped in New York City. Exactly in 3 years, we have helped 2,697 people. These are trans, gay, bisexual, refugees, asylum seekers, displaced people who are in New York City and they are looking for a place to stay. So what we do is we provide housing, like a shelter, and we also have a food program whereby we provide food on Monday, Fridays, and Saturday to homeless people and people experiencing food insecurity. We also have a thrift store. We have to give people clothing, people who are having issues with like having the basic necessity, food, shelter, and clothing. Then our asylum seekers and refugee, we provide case management, access to legal services, English as a second language, psychosocial support, which is very important because most LGBTQ people that are fleeing persecution have either been victims of domestic violence, detainment, some of them have PTSD and different kind of trauma. So helping them to find access to care is very important. That's our social service arm of our work. We also do activism in changing laws to favor LGBTQ displaced people in New York City. Through our activism in 2019, we achieved a change of law by the department, the DHS, Department of Health Services in New York City, that LGBTQ people cannot access, displaced people in New York City cannot access city shelter, even without any form of identification, through 2 city shelter, one in Fulton in the Bronx and the other one in 34th Street. So we also do such kind of activism that will enable LGBTQ people who are coming to New York City as immigrants to be able to find a gentle integration into the city, so the city can become like a home for them. And I also want to thank Lynn. She was very helpful in connecting us to Fifth Avenue, because one day I was in the office and I received an email like, hey, we would like to know about this program. And this is one thing that I don't say that often, is that most refugees, programs that are catering to refugees and displaced people do not really get a lot of funding and awareness from the government, because we're not in a voting bloc, quote unquote. So houses of worship like Fifth Avenue and other churches that give support to our work is like the lifeblood of what we are able to do as an organization. And I'll be leaving very soon, and I'm very proud of what we were able to do all this while, supporting LGBTQ people. And we just hope to continue that legacy of being able to provide services to people in need when they find our services.
Wow, thank you so much. Thanks for doing that work. So at this point, I'd like to just kind of throw out a question and then invite you to speak to it, share as the Spirit moves you, as we would have said in my home church. So the first thing that I personally am really curious to know, and I hope it'll bring about some good discussion, is what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the church today, informed by your personal experiences and your professional experiences?
The church is a big, is a big word. And I would say that some parts of the church are growing in leaps and bounds. And unfortunately, in ways that are not necessarily progressive. And so it seemed to me like the biggest challenge facing our church right now is that the more you get, I'm not going to bake a cake for a gay wedding because of my faith, that sort of, which is, an example of a bigger problem. I'm going to use my religious, and at what point is that genuine, and what point is that, well, here's a way that I can discriminate, and I can just, find a loophole in the law. The more people who are of a mind to be inclusive say that kind of institution is not for me, and then they don't look for an institution that is in fact affirming the way the two churches that we are involved with are. So when, the biggest challenge that I think we're facing is this sense of identity, and the secularization of our culture is happening, which, is in and of itself got its own thing, but people are basically letting go of a sense of community along with a sense, because they don't want to be identified with, things that we don't identify with. That's my first thought.
I think that conservatism is the word. The church is like a political institution in a kind of way. And back in the days, leaders of religious organizations are not easily challenged by their congregants. And we are in an inflection point whereby leadership is shared within a group of people. And the hierarchy and the institution of like a leader and people following that leader and do as I say is chipping away. And a new generation is coming who are egalitarian, and they are saying that let us have a shared space within the church. And the church has not come to that point yet. So for the church to make a decision as regard to accepting gay people, it has to go through a layers upon layers, or they break. Okay, my congregation, we go and form a new religion or stuff like that. So I think the way technology shifts and businesses get to shift or they die, churches are in that later phase of like, we will wait until we die before we shift, which is like a dogma, is a dogma they have of like people that are supporting us will continue to support us, and the few that we ship away wouldn't mean so much. But as people continue to ship away and continue to ship away, the church loses the hold it has on society. So I think the biggest challenge facing the church today is the hierarchy and that political or bureaucratic institution that has been there for so long, that they are failing to recognize that as society is changing, they have to also change how the church operates also, kind of.
Sounds like you want us to reform. We're pretty big about reform.
Oh, it's beyond reform. It's like it's like the togetherness of all the churches, one person making a decision for 15 different parishes. It wouldn't really work because people who live on the Upper West Side are different from people who live in Arkansas. And let people in Arkansas be ruled by the rules and regulation that govern them. Because if I'm a person of faith and I'm gay and my church does not accept me, and I see a group of people, I will go and join those group of people. And because of the bureaucracy it's taking for the church to wait for Arkansas to change, a lot of people in New York are moving away. It's just like kind of allowing micromanagement based on the landscape where they are located in, kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I love both of those perspectives. That's so interesting. So from where I am, what I'm working at, what I see that is a huge problem in the church and worries me is the divide between liberals and conserving folks, because it seems like we're not even, you're just speaking only about Christianity even. It's like we're not even part of the same family. We're not part of the body of Christ because we're so busy fighting each other about things. And it's really about the LGBT question. There are other things as well, but LGBT is always right at the top. And looking at the reasons why people will leave church, it's over LGBT concerns. So this is something that I think the Christian church needs to figure out. And I think a possible way forward is a missional perspective on pluralism, actually, where, and the way the framing that I like is covenantal pluralism, where we advocate for each other, where we're not in lockstep with our doctrine and our beliefs, but rather we advocate for each other's human dignity and each other's rights as human beings, rights to have faith, but also my right to be married to my wife, my right to have children. So that means that everyone advocates for each other. I think that's a potential solution. I do worry though, and and it's almost like I don't want to say, oh, I'm clergy, I'm Christian out in the world with people who don't know me, because they might get the wrong idea. It's almost, worse than being LGBT, because Christians now, so many people just have such a bad impression, and that really pains my heart. So I am hopeful that we can get this figured out, or maybe we will have another Reformation, reformed and always reforming. Morgan, I wonder what you think. You're so thoughtful.
Oh, please don't ask me. I actually wrote that question and thought, I'm so glad I don't have to answer it. I have similar views to you all, I think off the cuff. I did read an article recently about how basically the church is too progressive for, well, the part of the church that we find ourselves in is too progressive for the typical religious person. And so that's just kind of, it's a leaky bucket at that point. And I'm not sure how we fix that. I can't even venture a guess, but I do want to ask a question based on some things I think all three of you said. We're going to go off script, which is a big deal for me because I always stick to a manuscript. The first thing I just wanted to say was I love that you keep saying conserving. I've never heard that. And for me, when I hear that, I think it's good to not just say a conservative person, because that immediately pulls up certain assumptions. And I think when you say conserving, it really highlights that when somebody is conservative, often it's just because they want to retain something that's been good for them. And so they're conserving it. And I don't know if that's what you're intending, because I've never heard it, but I really like it and I might steal it. The question though, I first thought of it with the cake issue that Brian brought up, but I think it's relevant to a lot of things that you all three mentioned. My experience is that people who say, I'm not going to bake a cake because of my strong faith, in my experience, those people aren't just using that as an excuse to discriminate. In my experience, those people are sincere and they really have an authentic desire to be the type of Christian that they feel God has called them to be, and to, bring people onto the straight and narrow, because it's a life or death kind of scenario for them. So knowing that we can't prescribe a one-size-fits-all rule, how do we approach those people in ways that could be healthy and transformative?
Can I answer that? Because this is what I do a lot these days. So I think one thing is that one day I had an aha moment with a conserving pastor that I've been cultivating a relationship with for a long time. He said to me, Marion, what people don't understand is my Christianity, so conservative Christian, very to the right, my religion is my identity. And that was a real aha moment for me. So a lot of folks who are feeling like, okay, it's against my conscience to bake the cake, that it would be like me as an LGBT person doing something that, like hating on a trans person, or something just so terrible. For him, as that as his identity, it wasn't congruent for him. So okay, that for him, those are his beliefs. So then what I work on is, okay, if you're not able to bake that cake because that goes against your identity, what then could you do? Could you then behind the scenes pass off the cake baking to another person so that you maintain your identity as a religious person, and the queer couple that wants their wedding cake doesn't feel disrespected, isn't discriminated against, and feels loved. And then that's what spreads out into the community, because you don't get this fight over, I'm not going to bake a cake. It because the people who get hurt by that, I've worked with youth for so many years now. It's the queer youth that hears those messages in the media. They're fighting over me again. And then there's a spike in suicide attempts and youth homelessness. We need to get away from that fighting, and we need to figure out how to love each other better. Sorry to be on my soapbox, but I feel so strongly about it.
Marion, I don't know whether that was the best TED Talk I've ever seen or a sermon in 2 minutes. It was unbelievably empathic and really good.
Oh, thank you, Morgan.
Did anybody else want to add to the cake issue?
So, me and my partner, we are going to get married very soon. And we were just discussing about some of these issues, like vendors and things like that. And we're going to look at the venue, and we're like, oh, we shouldn't look at that venue. What if they don't allow gay people to marry there or stuff like that? Because all the pictures we see is only straight people. And I said that I don't want to go to a place where I wouldn't be loved and respected for who I am. If you don't want to bake me a cake because I'm a gay person, I don't want to use the F word, but like, I don't really care because there are so many good bakers. So I was even saying to the director, Glenda, the director of the LGBTQ Center on 13th Street, I said, why don't you do a registry of all the gay businesses in New York City, all the bakers, all the photographers, so that we patronize other gay people? Because I feel like these people are just sucking up all the energy we have to create systemic change with an issue about baking a cake for me or not. When there are people who are still suffering from conversion therapy, when there are people who their rights are being trampled every single day because they visibly identify as gay, as trans, and stuff like that. So like the cake should just go away right now because it's just taking too much of my energy. And I think I want to focus that energy on like Texas, Florida passed a bill on the first day of Pride that will restrict trans people from being able to be themselves, kids. So like the cake bakers bake for the straight people, and so many straight people, the few gay people. Maybe I'll become a cake baker so I can bake for all the gay people that exist out there. Because love is, if you have love in your heart, live with love and conserve the little energy you have so you can be able to use it for things that are protecting the people you love, so that young people, because if that cake baking case did not come up, I don't know how many young gay people will be like, I'm not going to get married because I'm afraid somebody's not going to bake a cake for me. So media pays attention to those stories because like they really shine the light. But when issues are happening in our community, does the media cover it? Trans people are dying every day. Does the media cover it? They don't really care about those things. So it's sometimes annoying that how these things shape up to be sometimes. I don't understand. That's what I think.
Mm,
I just
yeah,
like
go ahead.
I'd like to add a point, which is that that is almost a hackneyed example. Granted, I'm the one who used it. What we're really talking about is using the idea of religious, your religion, to be able to discriminate. And sure, the cake thing, you can take it or leave it, you can go to another baker, yes. But there's a deeper issue here, which is at what point does it stop where my religion says that you don't have a right to exist? As soon as we get to that point, or yes, I don't have to serve you, that's fine, because I mean, it's not fine, but it creates a place of this is my choice. But it's a thin membrane into suddenly, you shouldn't be having a wedding in this town. That sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like it grows on that. So it's I don't want to get hung up on the example and miss the cause underneath it. Learn again.
So I've just heard from Jamie that we should skip to the last question so that we still have time for Q&A. So the last thing I would love for us to talk about, with everything else that we're kind of holding, that we've already said, everything that's already on the table, why does representation matter?
Well, I think, an example that we can use, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but for example, I'm aware that in this conversation, I don't believe we have anybody who identifies as transgender or non-binary in this conversation. Is that how you identify?
I'm gender non-binary, just to say.
So my point is that the trans community, the gender non-binary community, and the gay community, there's certainly intersectionality, but and I am excited by when, especially when I look at young people, because it feels like the awareness and the acceptance that's beginning to happen in that regard is kind of what I experienced when I was 18, 19, 20, being gay, and that's wonderful. But there is an assumption that we say the words LGBTQ plus, et cetera, representation is important. I can't speak, I can speak for trans rights. I can't speak about trans rights from a personal point of view. You know what I mean? So I'm suddenly aware of that. And thank you, Marion, for being that person, because the absence of it, or the perceived absence of it, is palpable to me. So when there's no representation for folks that are gay and lesbian, I feel that too. So I representation matters because people are watching, children are watching, and we need to normalize and say this is who we are. It comes down to that.
Thank you very much for that. When I was very young, I know I didn't see any example of what it is to be a gay person. I didn't see magazines or television. So when people say that gay people were possessed, I really do believe it in my heart, because I was like, if they were not possessed, why are there no examples of gay people anywhere? And not until Facebook came in 2008 or 2009 that I saw Reverend Colin Howard is his name, is in UK, is part of the Anglican reverends that broke away from the Anglican Church in UK when they were trying to do the gay marriage thing in UK. And he did this group. It's like gay people that broke away from the church can group together on Facebook, and people are like talking about how religion affected them and how they are finding faith again. That was why I accepted myself as a queer person, because I saw another person that looked like me and was part of that entire narrative. And if you look at books, TV, and all these things, they shape our culture. And if we did not have a generation of people who fought for what it is to be a gay person, I would not be able to come to America and live freely, because I wouldn't know what being a free gay person really looks like. So I believe, like, for me, myself, my representation is a radical way of existing, being an activist is just being myself in the world. Because when I go to different circles, I don't know how I fit in. When I go to places as a Black person, I'm not seen as a Black person. I'm always seen as an African. If I go to the circles of African, I'm not seen as an African, I'm seen as a gay person. And if I go to where white Americans are, I'm a refugee. So I'm always something else other than who I am in that position. So inhibiting the differences I possess as a Black person, as a gay person, as a refugee, as an African, as a Christian, and really is important, because I'm showing other people like myself who do not fit into any of those boxes that you could be and you could exist and you could be all those things and still be a human being. So that is what it means for me to represent my community, is to show people like me that we deserve to be loved, embrace ourselves wherever we find ourselves in. And it wouldn't be possible for me if I didn't see somebody like James Baldwin, and it wouldn't be possible for another person if they didn't see somebody like me. So I think it's very important.
That was such a beautiful answer, Edafe, and you too, Brian. The only thing I have to add to that is to say that when we're in church or we're out in the world and we're talking about things and we think we're using expansive language, saying LGBT is so important, because as an LGBT person, if I hear someone say, it's like the all are welcome church sign, right? But if I don't hear someone say, and our LGBT siblings, or as Brian says, ladies and gentlemen, and neither, I forget how you say it, Brian.
Ladies and gentlemen, both and neither.
Perfect. Yeah. So that is a radical welcome for us, but it also is representation, because the youth are listening, and the youth so much more now are allies. So the young queer people are seeing potential role models. Okay, this is what I could grow up to be, but also their allies are watching and listening and saying to themselves, okay, so church isn't what I had heard. Church is a place that's for me too, as an ally. So it's so important, at not just Pride Month, but every single day.
Thank you so much. Those are all really fantastic answers. So for our last few minutes, we're going to allow a little bit of time for Q&A. So we just invite everybody who's on the webinar tonight to submit questions or topics for discussion into the Q&A feature. Jamie will pick from those and direct them to our three panelists.
And if you can't find the Q&A feature, it is at the bottom if you scroll, but there you can also put the questions in the chat and we can read them from there as well. Well, Morgan, while we're waiting for a question, I wonder if we should ask that question that we skipped.
Well, so the question we skipped was just if you, and in some ways I feel like we've answered this. So you could just highlight / zoom in, circle what you've already said about what makes LGBTQ Christians uniquely equipped to serve and lead in the church. You did kind of say it, so you don't necessarily have to add anything.
It's when you say uniquely equipped, because you don't want to in any way say that someone who's not LGBTQ is not also equipped. You know, I want to be careful with what I say. I want to be inclusive of straight people too. and you know, but I do know that if you know anybody who has struggled and then has come to accept who they are, there's a certain peacefulness, an aura about them, whether it's joy or whether it's sort of serenity. I can't describe it, but to knowing somebody before and after a coming out process, there's this release, and I think that helps in serving any community, and you know, to be part of the Christian church, to be able to be your authentic self is that's what we bring to it, you know.
we do have a question, a couple questions in the Q&A now. Christine asks, how can we at church create space or spaces to celebrate and mourn when needed? For example, violence against gender identity and the LGBTQ community.
There are specific times of the year. So for example, in the fall, there's the Transgender Day of Remembrance. So that's a particular time when the lives of transgender folks who have been lost over the past year are read, and identities are celebrated as well. There's also the Transgender Day of Resilience. So with a little bit of digging, and that's part of what Parity does, we're here to be helpful. There are different celebrations throughout the year depending on what the church would like to do. I think also including that, say, in prayer concerns and that type of thing. So it's something that is kind of like normal, that, okay, well, we're mentioning this. And so then the LGBT folks or their families are hearing this, and they feel recognized and they feel loved.
We are nearing the close, so I will. There is one more question that I am interested in as well. Tim Palmer Curl, who some of you know well, would like to know if they're willing to share what Bryan and Edafe are doing next, as well as for Marion. He's interested in hearing about Parity's work at the UN. So I guess let's start with Bryan, because that's what you mentioned first.
I am going to be the pastor at State Street Church in Portland, Maine, which is a very progressive and socially active church in the heart of Portland. There are reasons that I needed to go back to Maine, which are family reasons, and it breaks my heart to be leaving Holmes. I've been here 3.5 years, and I think there's been good work done. And when I look at sort of, in retrospect, I feel like the board has been set up for the next person who's already started, and I've been working with for 3 weeks, to really take us to the next level with a different energy. And I feel good about that work, I guess. But I am sorry to be leaving. I am excited about where the direction that I'm going though. I'm ending my career kind of like bookending as a pastor with 25 years of camp in the middle.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryan. Edafe, would you be able to share with us?
This is a long and arduous process. I've spoken to Marion so many times about this. So I'm in a transition phase of my life. I really enjoyed the work I did. Yeah, I sold my memoir to Simon & Schuster. I'm writing my book. It will be out June next year. I'm completing my master's in December. I'm going to take a 5 months break of not working because I haven't done that in my life. I came from Nigeria to the US, and I went into creating and building and sustaining an organization. The board have advertised 2 positions. I think we'll have 2 staffs who will be taking my role before I leave. And yeah, I'm leaving June 30th just to take time and maybe plan. You don't know what life will bring, but I'm not certain what I will do. I have an idea of what I want to do, but I'm not sure if that is the right way to go about doing it yet. So now it's just like relaxing time for me.
It sounds like you're creating space to be able to hear the call. So
yeah, I wanted to rest on the laurels of what I have done, but I'm too young. So I'm going to find that thinness, like you said, Brian. I'm waiting for the voice.
Awesome. Awesome. Marion, would you be willing to share with us just a bit about Parity's work at the UN?
Sure. Yeah. And it's thanks to Fifth Avenue Press that Parity became part of the affiliation process with the United Nations. So Seamus and John, last year in 2020, we did a homeless youth workshop for the United Nations. This year, we have a group of Parity youth that presented at the United Nations, and we were very, very proud of them, the work they did. The other thing that we're doing is we're helping to create an LGBT working group for the International Religious Freedom Roundtables. So this is in process, and I'm very excited about that because, as Edafe has spoken about tonight, there are so many people around the world who are people of faith who are experiencing horrific things. So we're going to provide a space where they can tell their stories internationally. So we're excited about that, and it's thanks to FAPC.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Morgan, for moderating. I was not absent. I did hear you. So thank you. Thank you for taking the lead with the conversation, and to all of you for such thoughtful responses to these questions. It's been really great, and I know people really enjoy hearing from folks who are involved with Fifth Avenue. So thank you all again for joining us, and good luck to Brian and Edafe on your future endeavors.
It's been great to be here.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all for joining us from home. Have a great night, everyone. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.